Show. Now, Ross Kaminsky on Denver's talk station, 630 KHOW.
Well, good morning. Happy Wednesday. Happy 2019. I'm Ross. Thanks so much for being with me. I hope you're able to join me right now on YouTube on our live stream. If you go to youtube.com and type in my name, Ross Kaminsky, it should come up at the top of the search list. You can click on it and see me in this kind of black and gray shirt. I'm only mentioning the shirt so you know that you're looking at the current live stream, okay? I'm wearing this black and gray kind of heavy shirt because it's cold in the studio. We're on Facebook Live as well, on facebook.com/630KHOW. So when you go to YouTube, by the way, actually when you go to either one of them, but when you go to YouTube, subscribe, okay? Hit that subscribe button, and then when I'm doing new stuff online, which could be here at the studio or it could be from home or whatever I'm doing, you'll be able to catch that, and that'll be pretty cool. So I appreciate everybody who's listening and everyone who subscribes and follows us on Facebook and all of that stuff. Oh, one quick thing before I get to poetry. Who else is going to do poetry, by the way, for you? You know what? Poetry on Morning Talk Radio. That's coming up in a moment. But first, I just want to share with you a really good prediction that I got from listener Julie, who said this. Happy New Year, Ross. So glad you're back on the air. Thank you, Julie. I'm glad to be back, too. I predict the new House Dems, to combat the coming climate apocalypse, will try to pass a law mandating that every person, so as to not misgender anyone, must carry around a potted plant to have equal O2/CO2 exchange and be carbon neutral. The government will also subsidize green education for foliage care, and if your plant dies, you will pay a tax and be shamed on social media. And if that happens, Julie, I will buy you lunch. The other thing I would say, Julie, don't give them any ideas, because Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez is already talking about the Green New Deal or the New Green Deal or some such idea. I promised that I wouldn't use the word stupid this year, so I'm going to avoid it. But anyway, don't give them ideas, because they'll follow it. Okay, poetry. So one of the most famous poems in American history, I would say it's in the top 5 in American history, is called Stopping by Woods on a Snowy Evening by Robert Frost. And as of yesterday actually, Stopping by Woods on a Snowy Evening, along with a bunch of other copyrighted stuff from 1923, is now in the public domain. And so this very, very famous poem is now no longer copyrighted, and people can use the words from this brilliant, famous poem whenever they want, however they want. You put it on a sweatshirt, put it on a coffee mug, do whatever. It's not copyrighted anymore. And actually, it would have come out of copyright some years ago, but Disney, in efforts to make more money off of their own creations, lobbied Congress to extend copyright protections. And so back in 1998, they actually did that and retroactively extended copyright protection for a bunch of things until December of 2018. So anyway, by the way, so what else is not copyrighted anymore? Superman? Yeah, I know, that sounds crazy, doesn't it? But according to the Washington Post, Superman, Gone with the Wind, and George Gershwin's Rhapsody in Blue, no longer copyrighted. And then, of course, there'll be a lot of books. According to Smithsonian Magazine, works by Willa Cather, Arthur Conan Doyle of Sherlock Holmes fame, Zane Grey, one of the great Western writers in American history, and this poem, Stopping by Woods on a Snowy Evening. And before I play the audio for you, and what I'm going to play for you is Robert Frost reading his own poem. One of the things that is, I didn't know about this actually, is that it was written in the summer. It was not written in the winter. And I'll tell you what, I'll tell you a little more about that in a second. But right now, I want to share with you, maybe for the first time on radio as a non-copyrighted poem, because really, what other talk show host is going to play poetry for you during the morning show? Robert Frost reading his own poem, Stopping by Woods on a Snowy Evening.
Stopping by woods on a snowy evening. Whose woods these are, I think I know. His house is in the village, though. He will not see me stopping here to watch his woods fill up with snow. My little horse must think it queer to stop without a farmhouse near, between the woods and frozen lake, the darkest evening of the year. He gives his harness bells a shake to ask if there is some mistake. The only other sounds the sweep of easy wind and downy flake. The woods are lovely, dark and deep, but I have promises to keep, and miles to go before I sleep, and miles to go before I sleep.
Wow. It's really quite a haunting poem, isn't it? And so let me just share with you from the Washington Post. The poem, with its moody pondering of mortality, was born in a flash of inspiration midway through Frost's life of professional acclaim and personal loss. In the summer of 1922, he was struggling with a long poem at his home in Shaftesbury, Vermont. He'd been working all night in the kitchen. He crumpled up his efforts and went out onto the porch in time to see the first glow of dawn. And again, keep in mind, right, we're talking about the summer. Somehow, the sunrise of a dry summer morning evoked in his tired writer's mind the evening of a snowy winter's day. Almost a hallucination, he would later say. He turned back to his pen, and one of the century's great poems was born, quote, without strain, in Frost's words. He said, in 20 minutes he had drafted the whole thing. According to a biographer of Robert Frost, in 20 minutes, he had drafted the whole thing. Extreme, shocking simplicity. That's where Frost was at his greatest. The poem was published the following year in his fourth collection, which was called New Hampshire, a poem with notes and grace notes, which won him his first Pulitzer Prize. And then he became more famous from there. He was nominated for the Nobel Prize in Literature a total of 31 times. I don't know if he ever won it. I'll have to look that up. Oh, here's an interesting thing. Okay. Have you guys ever heard of something called the Oxford comma? Do you know what the Oxford comma is? Okay. So, when I grew up studying English in elementary school and junior high school, which I guess is called middle school these days, but it was called junior high school when I was there, and even in high school. When there was a list, right, a list of, let's say, adjectives in a sentence, right, that actor is tall, good-looking, talented, and lives in Denver, right? You would put commas, right? Tall, comma, good-looking, comma, talented, and lives in Denver. And then we learned about this thing called the Oxford comma, which is another comma after the next to last item in the list. You with me, Shannon? The fox is red, fast, and hungry. So when I grew up, it would be red, comma, fast, and hungry. But it became kind of a thing, and I guess since it's called the Oxford comma, maybe it came from an English manual of style or something, but to say the fox is red, comma, fast, comma, and hungry. Right? So I grew up without there being a comma before the and, which is before that last adjective. But when you do that, it can really change the apparent meaning of something. And writers really write, professional writers write the way they write for a reason. And in Robert Frost's poem, the woods are lovely, dark and deep, but I have promises to keep and miles to go before I sleep. that first line, the woods are lovely, dark and deep. Robert Frost wrote it. The woods are lovely, comma, dark and deep. But in one of the early versions of the books that this poem came out in, a professor somewhere added a comma, which I wouldn't have added, but a professor named Edward Latham at Dartmouth added a comma in what the Washington Post describes as an authoritative Frost collection in 1969, a marring that would last for 30 years. So he put it in the book as the woods are lovely, comma, dark, comma, and deep. But it really means something different. I know I'm way off into the weeds here, or at least the trees of the forest, of the woods. But there's actually a piece in the Washington Post from 1996 about this. And because I am a language nerd and a grammar Nazi, I just thought I'd mention this to you. So think about this. And again, I realize I'm way out on a limb on one of those trees in the woods that Robert Frost was talking about, because what other morning host is going to talk about poetry on the first Wednesday morning in 2019? But here, nobody, right, Shannon? But so the woods are lovely, comma, dark, comma, and deep, versus the woods are lovely, comma, dark and deep. So the author in the Post says, and again, this is 20-something years ago, to my ear, this makes two entirely different, almost opposite meanings. In the first line, the emphasis is evenly distributed. Lovely equals dark equals deep. It's a peaceful, undisturbing scene. In the second, dark and deep is a kind of loveliness, and the second phrase is spoken rapidly, as if it were a darting glance at a darkness and a deepness one doesn't want to linger over too long. The second line, right, the one with just the one comma, the woods are lovely, comma, dark and deep, is the one that Robert Frost wrote in one of the best-known of all American poems. The first line was written by a Dartmouth professor named Edward Latham, who edited Frost's poems after his death and took it upon himself to correct Frost's punctuation. Latham's version appeared in The Poetry of Robert Frost, published by Holt Reinhardt Winston in 1969, and has been the standard version ever since. Isn't that amazing? And I'm not going to go into it more, but just the idea that a professor or anybody else would have the nerve to change the punctuation in a brilliant poem by a brilliant poet, one of the most famous American poets and one of the most famous American poems of all time, is kind of a crazy story. And with that, thus ends my poetry for this Wednesday morning. But you know what? Just because it's so awesome, can I play it for you one more time? Do you mind, Shannon?
Stopping by woods on a snowy evening. Whose woods these are, I think I know. His house is in the village, though. He will not see me stopping here to watch his woods fill up with snow. My little horse must think it queer to stop without a farmhouse near, between the woods and frozen lake, the darkest evening of the year. He gives his harness bells a shake to ask if there is some mistake. The only other sounds the sweep of easy wind and downy flake. The woods are lovely, dark and deep, but I have promises to keep, and miles to go before I sleep, and miles to go before I sleep.
Okay, I've got a trivia question for you. I'll tell you what, this is going to be my own little thing. I wasn't even thinking of doing this. But if you're going to play, you cannot cheat. You cannot go look this up online. All right? There was a movie. There was a movie in which the last part of that poem, the woods are lovely, dark and deep, but I have promises to keep, and miles to go before I sleep, and miles to go before I sleep. The last part of that was used as a trigger to set off brainwashed, hypnotized sleeper agents. The first person who can tell me the name of that movie, which was from 1977, and I'll give you a hint, it starred Charles Bronson, but it's not a famous movie. The first person to tell me the name of that movie, I will send you at my expense a copy of Bastion's of the Law or Henry Hazlitt's Economics in One Lesson. You can choose which. So what was the name of the movie in which that Robert Frost thing was used as an activation signal for, deeply hypnotized, brainwashed sleeper agents? Don't cheat. You'd really have to know your movies to know this. But if you know, give me a call at 303-713-TALK or shoot me an email at ross@khow.com, or you can even text me. Oh, my gosh. I got a winning email already. That didn't take long. All right, Michael, I'll be back in touch with you. And this is Steve, you said? All right, let me grab a call from Steve, who thinks he knows the answer to it. Steve, if you know the answer, then you and Michael can both win because your call arrived at the same time as his email. What was the movie?
Telephone.
That's right. Do you remember seeing it?
Yeah, I'm a little bit of an older guy. Saw it at the theater. It was a really good movie.
I remember. You know what I remember about it, though? At the time, when they used those words, I didn't know where they came from because I was not even a teenager when this movie came out. I probably saw it when I was a teenager, and I didn't know the source of those words, and I just thought they were so haunting. So that might have even been the first time I ever heard those words was in that movie, which is why it really stuck with me once I learned where they came from. So hey, I'll tell you what, Steve, can you send me an email at ross@khow.com and give me your mailing address and let me know whether you want Frederick Bastiat's The Law or Henry Hazlitt's Economics in One Lesson, and I'll send you whichever one you like.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
All right. Telephone, starring Charles Bronson and Lee Remick. Well, I didn't expect to make a content out of Robert Frost, and I also didn't expect to do a whole segment on Robert Frost, but there you go. Next, yesterday a NASA spacecraft marked an amazing first in the history of science. I'll tell you about it.
This report is sponsored by Rocket Mortgage by